You are watching this video on a device that would have seemed like pure magic to anyone living 200 years ago. The screen, the internet routing the data, and the microchips running billions of calculations per second to keep it all stable. We like to tell a very specific story about how we got here. We picture a brilliant, self-made inventor, locked in a suburban garage, working with scrap parts to solve a problem everyone else thought was impossible. It is an idea we trace back through our history. We imagine the Wright brothers, or Thomas Edison, working entirely on their own to conjure innovation out of thin air. But that timeline overlooks the scientific foundations. The mathematicians and physicists across Europe and around the world spent centuries building the knowledge that made American innovation possible. America's true historical superpower was the ability to take those scientific theories and build the massive, coordinated machinery required to turn them into products, and eventually civilization-altering industries. When you look at Thomas Edison, the famous narrative credits him with the incandescent light bulb. But a light bulb sitting alone on a laboratory bench is essentially useless. This diagram shows what Edison actually engineered, the complete system required to make that bulb work. He designed the Pearl Street station, the distribution network, meters, and safety devices. Without that infrastructure pushing power into homes, the bulb remains a laboratory curiosity. You see the exact same pattern with Alexander Graham Bell and the telephone. A phone handset is just wood and wire. Making it work meant building a sprawling physical network. It required thousands of miles of wire, switching stations, and enormous rooms full of operators physically routing calls to connect millions of people. These pioneers transformed the world because they recognized that standalone products are powerless without a delivery system. They were architects of entire industries. European engineers had been building gas-powered vehicles for decades before Henry Ford entered the market. He did not invent the automobile. His mechanical breakthrough was implementing the moving assembly line. By systematically pushing parts down a track, he cut the time required to build a Model T from 12 hours to about 90 minutes, allowing him to slash the price. Then he applied that systemic thinking to his workforce. He doubled the prevailing industrial wage to $5 a day. His logic was practical. If his workers could not afford to buy the cars they were building, the market for those cars would remain limited. That self-sustaining loop, cheap production matched with higher worker wages, pushed cities outward into suburbs and created the modern retail landscape we see today. Shifting to the digital era, we find the origins of the tech boom not in a sleek metropolis, but in California's mid-century fruit orchards. The transistor is a semiconductor device that can amplify or switch electrical signals. By replacing large, power-hungry vacuum tubes, it allowed computers to shrink until billions of components fit in a space smaller than a fingernail. But the companies built on this technology did not rise in a vacuum. They relied on a heavily subsidized institutional scaffolding. As we can see in this structural diagram, a successful tech startup sits at the top of a massive foundation. Beneath it are heavy pillars of federal investment through agencies like DARPA, research from land-grant universities, open immigration policies, and venture capital. The Silicon Valley ecosystem is itself a highly tuned machine designed specifically to absorb failure and scale high-risk ideas. Today, that machine is facing direct competition. China has made technological leadership a national priority, making massive, state-directed investments into artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and semiconductors. We have seen this kind of rivalry before. In 1957, the Soviet Union's launch of Sputnik posed an immediate challenge to American dominance. Decades later, in the 1970s and 80s, hyper-efficient Japanese manufacturing fiercely challenged American industrial leadership. The United States responded to those past crises by upgrading its foundational institutions, increasing research funding, and leaning into its entrepreneurial culture. The question now is whether the current funding models, the immigration pathways, and the tolerance for failure are resilient enough to meet a challenge that is in some ways larger than any America has faced before. The outcome of this century will not be decided by who has the smartest individual in a garage. It will be decided by the nation that best maintains the massive machinery required to turn science into reality.